Welcome to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin. Today we are live and we've got a lot to talk about today. We are going to be talking about an update on the strikes that are going on right now. We're going to talk about a lawsuit filed by the California Trucking Association, and we're going to talk about alternative fuel sources. And we've got a guest today that's going to be giving us some insight into some of the options available that we don't hear a lot about in mainstream media. So let's get our live broadcast going. I've got with me Diana Cudmore, our podcast director. Diana, welcome to our live broadcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
All right, so let's get into it. The California Trucking Association filed a lawsuit in federal court to block the implementation of the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. The ACF was adopted by California Air Resources Board, or CARB, and it looks like there's a bunch of states who are saying, yeah, we want to get on board with this as well. It really includes the most stringent restrictions on internal combustion vehicles that we've seen so far. And really, the goal of all of this is to completely phase out ICE vehicles by 2040. One of the things that jumps out at me is we've seen this January 1st, 2024 date. It is something that's coming up very quickly. And in California, drayage fleets will not be able to register ICE vehicles after January 1st. And this is something where over the next few years, they're going to see them aggressively try to move ICE vehicles completely out of the picture. So why is it that the California Trucking Association chose now to take this action in court? What did you see from the reports when you were doing the research on this, Diana?
So I would say probably the biggest reason is that the members of the California Air Resources Board seem to think that the market is ready to commit to completely battery electric or alternative fuel vehicles, especially in those drayage fleets. However, some other associations would say that that's not true. So the American Trucking Association's president, Chris Spears, said that CARB is an unelected board forcing trucking companies to buy zero-emission trucks. So obviously the ATA thinks that this has come too soon. Another thing, if you've been keeping up with, the CARB news, is that, so this is, we're talking about the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. There's also an Advanced Clean Trucks rule, and that is regulating what kind of trucks can be brought into and sold in California. Now that's new trucks. So the ACF, Advanced Clean Fleets, and the ACT kind of go hand in hand, where the ACT basically prohibits the sale of ICE vehicles completely in California starting in 2036. The ACF essentially sets up the requirement that fleets will have to buy all of these electric trucks, which will be sold in California. So there's also a schedule that's been published by CARB. It's a little bit confusing, where they're telling us that the high priority Class 8 fleets will have different milestones than perhaps work trucks or sleeper cabs. And it's a little bit confusing to understand. In fact, some parts of the law seem to contradict each other. So I look forward over the next few years to see which parts of this law are upheld. That is, of course, if the federal lawsuit does manage to block this, and then if the ACF actually goes into effect after that.
Right. And that, I mean, these legal challenges are absolutely critical for the trucking industry, because the reality is that if you work in trucking, I think you know that we're not ready for this aggressive move. And also we seem to be hyper focused on just one of the possible solutions to the challenge of dealing with internal combustion engines, right? And I know that, like, when I was at TMC, so that's put on by the American Trucking Association. TMC is the Technology and Maintenance Council fall meeting in Cleveland. Once again, the second year in a row, I've had fleets come out of these meetings shaking their heads saying, all we ever talk about is battery electric vehicles. there's so many other challenges and issues that we need to be addressing. And we're not done with ICE vehicles yet, so we can't completely ignore them. So there seems to be almost like feeling of frustration. And also, again, this is mandates that are being forced. And, in the States, you might be able to say, well, I'm not in California. This doesn't necessarily affect me. But there's a whole list of states that are lining up to say, basically, whatever happens in California, we're going to adopt the same standard. So I think we're going to see a lot more conflict on this. I think these legal challenges are important. Hopefully, the legal challenges can be addressed in as close to a bipartisan way as possible, because we don't really get into politics, but certainly we want human flourishing and we want the trucking industry to be strong. And so, while I think it's entirely appropriate for us to consider all of the different perspectives, we still need something that's actually workable, that actually is going to roll out and not just drive up the cost on fleets, make fleets less uh, less dependable, make the cost of moving goods skyrocket, which then only contributes to inflation even more. So, I think at the heavy duty parts report, we're just calling for people in the industry to continue to be um, realistic, and to continue to put forth these legal challenges in such a way that will be beneficial for the industry, which by extension is beneficial for everyone. And at the same time, if you are an American citizen, you have the opportunity to talk to your local representatives and to express your opinion and try to get your opinion heard. So I think that's all important. And we've seen that call to action within the trucking industry, whether it has to do with emissions, whether it has to do with right to repair. It's basically the same kinds of scenarios unfolding on both of those major issues that affect our industry.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Something interesting about the Advanced Clean Fleets rule is that in some parts of it, it specifies any internal combustion engine, not just diesel. And in other places, it says zero emissions. So I wasn't able to get a clear picture of what exactly, like what alternative power sources are actually going to be used in California. So that'll be really interesting to see. And the federal lawsuit that was filed by the California Trucking Association really centers around the idea that CARB doesn't actually have the legal authority to put these regulations into place, because there is an old law on the books in California stating that no government industry, or sorry, no government association or board can,
Agency. Mhm.
right, agency can put um, something into place which affects the prices, routes of the trucking industry. So um, that's really what the legal challenge is about. Unfortunately, if this law does go into effect, we could see one of two things. Either California was right and the market was ready and they were able to kind of force or encourage innovation at such a pace that, okay, everything's ready for 2036 or 2043 or whichever deadline actually comes into effect first. Or the rest of the industry will be right. And 30% or so of the trucking industry, which is based in California, uh, could crumble or turn in chaos. We really don't know. Thankfully, this federal lawsuit, we're hoping, will put the brakes on this until the law becomes more clear. Fleets can get a better understanding of what's actually expected of them. And hopefully, the market can have time to catch up.
Common sense is rarely common practice. We need a lot more common sense. All right, let's move on. We've been reporting on the strikes. They're affecting the big three automakers, but they're also affecting heavy duty truck manufacturers. It looked a couple weeks ago like Mack was going to strike a deal with their staff and their employees, and then all of a sudden, kind of like out of left field, we found out last week that no, indeed, Mac is going to strike. So it's been an interesting time period. There's a lot of things going on, and we need to get into it. So first, let's talk about the big three automakers. They're in what, the fifth week of their strike. Bill Ford, the executive chair at Ford, claims that Ford is the most pro-union automaker. This is also something that we're seeing. These strikes, like all of a sudden, there's these big proclamations being made. There's people kind of like lobbying and positioning themselves. There's a lot of use of media to be able to try to get certain messaging across. And Bill Ford, he says that the strikes are bolstering non-union competition like Toyota and Honda, that it's hurting the unions in the long run. UAW President Sean Fain, he responded and said Bill Ford knows exactly how to settle this strike. If Ford wants to be an all-American auto company, they can pay all-American wages and benefits. So we see these guys going head to head. Workers at UAW are urging more strikes and walk-offs, and inventory is dwindling. So we just kind of got over the situation with automakers and their inability to produce vehicles during COVID. And now inventory levels were just recovering, prices were just starting to stabilize. And now around the country, we're going to be right back into having a lack of inventory at the auto level. So this is, this thing just keeps carrying on. And what do you think from the research you've done, what you've read, Diana? Do you think there's an end in sight, or do you think this is going to drag on maybe as far as Christmas or into the new year? What do you think?
I would not be surprised if the strikes drag on and even get worse. I read a statistic that 97% of the UAW members that are involved in these big three automakers actually voted for an all-out strike. So what we're seeing in auto is somewhere around 80% of the workers who are like technically on strike are doing what's called a stand-up strike, where essentially they have continued to work without a contract. And this is really controversial in, amongst the union members. Some people say that, we want, we don't want to like hurt the economy so much. We don't want to completely stop the production of cars, right? But then there are other UAW members who say, if we don't do a full-on strike, then we're never going to get anywhere. And so I believe that one of the sources said that they're thinking about asking for a 40% wage increase, whereas the wage increase that was offered at the beginning of this contract negotiation in auto was not anywhere near that. So if the UAW members continue to band together and do an all-out strike, I see no end to this until these big automakers are really hurting by paying higher wages and benefits.
Yeah, I saw one economist who said that he feels that Tesla and Toyota are the only two automakers who are going to survive the next decade. Now, it's a pretty
Wow.
dire prediction, and whether or not that's true or not would obviously remain to be seen. That seems pretty drastic and dramatic, but it kind of shows you the volatility in the market, where we're sitting right now as an industry. Let's move on to the trucking side of it. This is the heavy duty parts report. And you got to produce new trucks, otherwise you don't have any need for parts and you don't have a strong aftermarket. As we talked about, Mack looked like they were, it's one thing for the automakers to be going on strike, it's another thing for the truck manufacturers, and it looked like Mack was going to avoid it, and all of a sudden they go ahead and they strike. So let's get into the details. There's been a lot of criticism thrown at the current union framework, and it's being blamed for this unexpected no vote on the recent proposal, which a couple weeks ago looked like it was going through. The reason being put forward that there was a no is that the deal lacked a cost of living increase, stating that a 19% wage increase works out to a 20% decrease in your income because of inflation. So they're saying, look, inflation has gone so high, even if you give us a 19% increase, we're still taking a pay cut. And the UAW president, Sean Fain, he is being accused of working on the side of the company instead of the workers. That seems so contrary or counterintuitive. Like, why is he being accused of that, since he looks like, at least from a media perspective, it really looks like he's standing up for the worker, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems to me like some of the UAW members are feeling like they're not actually being involved in the negotiations. They're sort of blaming Sean Fain of working directly with the companies. So in this case, it would be Mack, since we're talking about medium and heavy duty. Uh, they're kind of accusing him of trying to back alley a deal that's actually not good for workers, according to the UAW, members who are claiming this against Sean Fain. They're saying that they weren't actually given an opportunity to review the contract, that the votes and the desires of the UAW members are not being considered. And actually, they, looking back in time, before the strike was called, Sean Fain endorsed this deal. And now he's, happy that Mack UAW workers are standing up for, what their rights should be, right? Um, and so this is kind of a real accusation that, for me, really turns the idea of what a union is on its head. You would
Mhm.
think that the president would represent the members of the union, and yet the members of this union are saying, no, that's actually not what's happening.
Well, and it's not all members. That's the thing, is that
Mhm.
there's certain
Right.
groups of them, and it does seem to be like, depending on how they're aligned with certain ideas, kind of influences how they think this is all going. So, what are the demands? The demands is a 50% wage increase to make up for decades of declining real wages. They want there to be the immediate uh, removal of all the tiers in the way that this is structured. They want it tied to real inflation numbers, and they're also looking for a fully funded pension for all workers. They want no increase in healthcare costs, no layoffs, and no cap on profit sharing. And they want a 4-year contract with contracts for all the auto workers ending at the same time. So they want alignment there. So according to the sources that we found, these are the demands. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out as well. Doesn't look like there's a conclusion to this anytime soon. So we're going to have to keep a close watch on this. Again, if production on trucks fall, now Mack isn't one of the largest, highest volume trucks in the marketplace, but you know full well that any of the other unions that are at these other truck manufacturers, they're watching this very, very closely and taking notes. So we might not see the end of this problem of strikes anytime soon, and when these other contracts come up for renewal. So that's the situation. We've got to keep an eye on it and see what happens. But bad news all around for an already slumping trucking industry, an already very difficult economy with inflationary pressure on everyone, and the real threat of a looming downturn. So we see kind of everything just looks like it's going in the wrong direction right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Now, just a little bit of history, that, you might be wondering, why isn't fully funded pensions and a cost of living adjustment already baked into the contract?
Mhm.
I learned that back in the Great Recession, so, 2000.
2008, 2009.
Exactly. The union actually agreed to put those items on hold in their contract negotiations. And that was a good move. They were trying to keep the companies that were employing them in business, right? That makes sense that they
Yeah.
were willing to take these sacrifices. However, that was a long time ago. That was
That was
15.
then, and then we went on the greatest bull run of economic history in the West. So that
Absolutely.
that changes. Although there's also been a pandemic, and so it's
Right.
never a straight line.
Yeah, that's true. And that final demand that they have, that 4-year contract that aligns all of the auto workers with the contracts ending at the same time, they're trying to build in more of that bargaining power that they have right now, which is
Mhm.
that the contract for Mac is up, the contract for all of those auto workers is up. So all of the UAW members can band together and sort of use this collective bargaining uh, some would say against, but hopefully they're working with.
Leveraging what they do. I mean, that is
Right.
what a union is supposed to do. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Okay, well, we talk a lot about these contentious issues, but we also like to talk about interesting things that affect the potential future of our business. I know when I think about like what we were talking about earlier, we're talking about battery electric vehicles, we talk about mandates, we talk about the changing technology in our industry. Um, it makes us think, especially about parts. What's the future of the parts world going to look like, depending on which type of power source is successful? And for those that have followed the research, the well documented research put out by the American Trucking Research Institute about the clear challenges of converting the global fleet over to battery electric vehicles, we know that there's some major hurdles. And I think there's a lot of us in the industry that really feel that a multi jet power generation type, where there's many platforms, where we have ICE, we have battery electric, but we have alternative fuels as well, should all be looked at as part of maybe the way to move forward. And one such option is to talk about alternative fuels and to talk about ammonia fuel conversion. So admittedly, I don't know much about this, but we have a guest, Diana. So tell us a little bit about our guest before we bring them on.
Absolutely. So on our website, we have a contact form, and a young man from Canada who wishes to remain anonymous wrote in to tell us about an amazing story of a 1981 Chevy Impala that was converted to run on ammonia. Now, this was a few decades ago, but it turns out that this project turned into an entire company headed by Greg Vezina, and he has nearly 30 years in this ammonia fuel conversion space. And
Okay.
he's here today to talk about the potential heavy duty applications of this technology.
And to make it even better, he's a good Canadian kid like I am. So from the Great White North, Greg, welcome to the Heavy Duty Parts Report.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we're excited to talk to you about this technology. First of all, maybe just give us a brief overview of how the technology works and why it is something that we should be looking at.
Okay, little grade 5 science and math. Okay, NH3 is made up of hydrogen and nitrogen. It has one nitrogen atom and 3 hydrogen atoms surrounding it. You can store more hydrogen, about 1.5 times as much hydrogen in NH3 at lower pressures and higher temperatures than you can hydrogen. Hydrogen doesn't like to be hydrogen. Hydrogen likes to be bound with another chemical. So with nitrogen in ammonia, with oxygen in water, and with carbon in hydrocarbons. So the first thing is that ammonia is the easy way to do hydrogen storage. And that's because of the pressures and temperatures. It takes as much as 60% of the energy in hydrogen gas to compress and liquefy it for storage and transport. There are 2 ways to do that. One is with pressure, about 5 to 10,000 psi, pounds per square inch. The other is with temperature. You refrigerate it down to 290 C, minus 290. Ammonia, you at 65 Celsius is 100 psi at operating temperatures, 200 psi at 100 Celsius. And you refrigerate it to minus 32, it's a liquid. So essentially, ammonia is ice or water versus snowflakes in
Right.
terms of hydrogen. Okay. Now, there are many ways to use hydrogen, and there are many ways to use ammonia. And one of the advantages of ammonia is you can either use ammonia directly in an engine. For example, in a diesel engine running on pure ammonia, it'll run at about 120% of bench plate efficiency. It's more efficient. It burns better because there's less wasted heat. And all engines are based on what's the net efficiency to those rear wheels. What's my cost per mile? The other thing you can do is you can crack hydrogen out of ammonia and run an engine on diesel, hydrogen, ammonia, or any combination thereof. Now, these are what you will call retrofit or aftermarket applications where we can use existing technologies. This is not a panacea. Nothing is simple and easy. There's no such thing as a zero-emission vehicle. There might not be any emissions in the tailpipe from a battery vehicle, but all of the research in the world, including stuff that we did at University in Oshawa and is included in my book, Ammonia Energy Technologies, says the only time a battery vehicle is better in terms of life cycle is when 100% of the electricity used to power it is from renewable energy. Guess how many places on Earth have 100% renewable energy?
Zero.
Well, Norway claims it, but okay, so. But the bottom line is, and the point on your previous call, the CARB, we have the same issues in Canada with regulations that, quite frankly, someone with grade 5 math and science just shakes their head. Here's another example. Canada and the United States are increasing our ethanol mandate from 10 to 15%. The EU is reducing it from 7 to 3.9. Why? Because someone did the math. Ethanol only contains 75% of the energy that was in the fertilizer and the fuel used to make it. You want to reduce pollution by 25%? Outlaw methanol, lower food prices, feed people. But as Al Gore said, and I know we're not allowed to talk politics, as he said 10 years ago, worst thing we ever did, but once we started buying votes, we can't stop. Okay, so let's get to the point. There are technologies that exist to retrofit. These will need time to be tested in the marketplace. We're going to have regulations for handling and storing hydrogen and ammonia. The projects that are being done today are science projects. They're not economic. They cost 10 times the cost of diesel. But there are better ways. And the biggest problem is, and this is the thing I love about America, and you're now doing just as wrong as we do, is you're picking winners and making losers out of everybody else. What we need to do is say, here's a price on all pollution, not just carbon from fossil. Here's the price of the pollution in the product that we're producing. Consumer, buy what you want. Oh, and some guy from Tennessee will tell you that he's got his nuclear-powered truck. And the EPA will say, no problem, it's $5 million a mile to run it. Cash up front, how many miles would you like to buy? Wow. So I'm being a little bit ludicrous, but the point is, if we had a real price on all pollution with no subsidies, no incentives, nobody picking winners except business and consumers, we'd have a different place. That said, there's new technologies now emerging as well. And the issue for the trucking industry and the parts industry is, are we going to replace $500,000 power units with $1.5 million power units with exotic fueling systems like hydrogen or even ammonia, safety and handling, employee training, insurance, accident prevention? Now, the good news is this research has been done. Lloyd's of London will insure any diesel vehicle that runs on ammonia for the same price anywhere in the world because they've done the risk analysis. There will be less deaths because there's no flame. There will be more injuries because ammonia will cause lung damage, et cetera, et cetera. And they don't like, to be honest, the insurance industry doesn't like paying for injuries. They like things nice and clean. You're dead, how much do we pay next? However, business is business. So the insurance industry did the analysis and they realized it cost them less money to insure and pay for risk associated with ammonia than it would with hydrocarbons because the flammability limits and the safety risks. Okay. But industry does not have the expertise. The average trucking company does not have the expertise to handle hydrogen, let alone ammonia. In fact, they don't even have the expertise to handle battery. So
Well, that's
So,
something, Greg, let me
yeah,
interject there. That's something that we had a guest on the Heavy Duty Parts Report, and James L. Cade, and he spent a lot of time over the last couple of years with learning about battery electric vehicles, and he's a consultant with fleets, and one of the things that we were talking about is even just the training of technicians, right? That there's
Mhm.
a big discussion about how we handle that. Should we completely train a new workforce to only work on BEVs, or should we utilize the existing workforce and cross train them across different platforms? So let me ask you something. With the technology that your company's been involved in developing, when it comes to, you're talking about retrofitting existing vehicles, I see that as a big win if we can retrofit existing vehicles, because of what is required to mine natural resources to make new vehicles. So if we have to convert the entire fleet and we're going to scrap everything we've already built, to me that has a pretty big price tag when it comes to pollution, and it comes to the contribution to further climate change because of whatever had to be put out just to produce these new vehicles. So
there's
retrofit to me is a real option that we should be looking at more at.
there's no question we should be looking at retrofit, but I'm going to say that we shouldn't predetermine what we think will work or won't work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also going to say that there is some amazing developments in science and technology, even in the last 4 or 5 years, and some big ones in the last year or so, using photochemistry, optophotochemistry, to deal with hydrocarbons. So let me just say two things or three things, and I'm just going to go quick. First, we do not have the resources and the industrial capacity to convert or to stop using internal combustion engines in 2035, and we don't have it for 2050. And anybody that tells you that we do is not speaking the truth. If you'd like the truth, here's the truth. You can check it out with the International Energy Agency. The total global supply of lithium, if not used for anything but vehicles, which means no cell phones, no TVs, no nothing, could build 7 million vehicles a year. Between now and 2035, that's 100 million vehicles. Right now, we build 70 million vehicles a year. So by 2035, we'll build 100 million BEVs, and we'll build 1 billion more internal combustion engine vehicles to add to the 3 billion that already exist. Now, how on January 1st, 2036, are we now going to not have them?
Right.
Okay, so that's first.
And the American Trucking Research Institute actually backs that up, because they put out a report at the end of 2022 where they talked about minerals, and they talked about the global availability of these minerals. And there's absolutely clear research, and you can just type in ATRI, and you'll see their research papers. They're all available. You just give them your email address and you can download them. So this is publicly available, well researched information. So I know that to be true.
Right. Now, secondly, and I tell your viewers, whether they're in industry or whether they're just consumers, the most powerful thing you can do is write a letter to your senator or your congressman, state and even federal, and say, grade 5 math.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And look, we've done this in Canada, and the research has been done. We did a huge study in the Montreal Institute, Urban Institute, and Concordia University. We looked at what is the effect of battery vehicle subsidies on reducing pollution, just carbon, because of course batteries are zero emission. They create no pollution whatsoever between their beginning and end because they're made from unicorn farms. But anyway,
that sounds like
here's
sarcasm.
the $5,000 battery vehicle subsidy in Canada reduced CO2 at $200 a ton. Now, you can take natural gas, make ammonia, sequester the carbon, add the carbon to 75% of the natural gas, make urea, which is a fertilizer, with zero carbon emitted for $20 a ton.
Wow.
Why are we spending 10 times the cost to reduce only carbon pollution from batteries than it cost us to eliminate all the pollution from natural gas? So that's existing technology, but this gets even better. I love America. Okay. The District of Columbia just opened 5 years ago, the first municipal waste to fertilizer fuel plant.
Wow.
They used to blow $130 million a year in sunk costs, the negative impact of waste disposal. That plant, upon operating, turned into a $30 million a year profit. It's so profitable and so successful that the 5 states surrounding the District of Columbia have now ordered those plants because the District of Columbia bought the license to the technology in North America. In 5 years, they'll be making $150 million a year profit on their waste that used to cost them 130 dead.
Wow.
There are none of these plants open in North America except that. There are 170 of them open all around the world because people put a price on waste. People put a price on pollution. We pump it into our lakes and rivers. So that's the second point. Third point, and this is the most important point. Whether or not you agree with COVID and blah, 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 if you understand the science, in 9 months, we did something that had never been done before, should have taken 5-6 years. The Manhattan Project in 10 months did what should have taken a decade. The Inflation Reduction Act will, regardless of all the warts, drive innovation and research in new technologies to the point that I believe that most of the technologies we think are the emerging technologies today will be dead in 5 years. And let me give you a great example. 90% of all chemicals, including petroleum, are manufactured using thermal energy, heat, made from hydrocarbons. The Greens have a legitimate argument when they say you can use wind and solar to make hydrogen to add to hydrocarbons so you don't have any carbon pollution upstream. But at the end, you're going to burn the hydrocarbon, you're going to have downstream. And if that were true, they would be right. But it isn't true anymore. We now have the technology to use light to convert hydrocarbon, to convert anything that contains hydrogen, water, hydrocarbons, ammonia, into its constituent components. So the hydrogen runs to the hydrogen, the carbon runs to the carbon, the nitrogen to the nitrogen. We can use the existing infrastructure to ship those hydrocarbons to the end use. On your truck, we put a unit. It cracks the hydrogen and carbon into 2 separate things. Your vehicle runs on pure hydrogen. The carbon is collected the way the blue is collected in EU. When you fill up your diesel, they pay you for the carbon because you've just refined carbon.
That's pretty
costs
cool.
money to refine carbon. So
Greg, what I hear you saying,
will do this. Okay, they're coming. And
right,
this has been proven at the University of Toronto. There's work being done in the EU. There's work being done in China and Japan. So I believe that we're not going to leave 300 years of hydrocarbons in the ground. Mm-hmm. What we're going to do, and that's only petroleum hydrocarbon, what we're going to do is we're going to not emit the carbon. Now, what that means is something fundamental. Right now, 13 countries provide 90% of the world's energy. If you can use any form of carbon to make hydrogen and carbon fibers, $1 million a ton, eh?
Wow.
And the carbon business is $10 trillion a year out of the 100 trillion GDP. This is a very, very big business. What's going to happen is 90% of the countries in the world 10 years from now will make their own energy fuel from a domestic resource. Mm. And to know I'm right, look at what Brazil did. 35 years ago, they were bankrupt, 19th largest economy in the world. The IMF was selling their schools and hospitals to raise money. They said, we're going to bulldoze rainforests. The environmentalists said, don't do it, don't do it. They said, it's either that or starve. They did it. It took them 10 years to figure out you plant tree rows so it isn't washed away every spring in the monsoons.
Right.
Today, they got the 9th largest economy in the world. There's nothing in the world that runs on alcohol that isn't built in Brazil, and every car company makes alcohol cars in Brazil. So what did the IMF say? They said you can spend 10 times as much making your own energy as you import because the money circulates in your economy 13 times, generating 130% in tax, and the money that leaves your economy comes in and buys your infrastructure for 10 cents on the dollar. So finally, what's happened with Russia and what's happening looks like it is going to happen in the Middle East. The next set of oil shocks will turn every country in the world into a fortress making their own energy. There, I'm done. Thanks.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for all of that information. Unfortunately, Jamie's having some technical issues. So you have been listening to a live broadcast of the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm Diana Cudmore, the podcast director here at the Heavy Duty Parts Report. And don't forget to follow the show. Now, make sure that you do that before next Monday's episode drops, because it will be a good one. We look forward to speaking to you more. And thank you for attending. Goodbye.